Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our Q&A. I've got some questions already sent in, so thank you. What I would love is for you all to send any and all, and I'm hoping I don't eat crow for this, but send any and all of your questions in the Q&A box, and I will do my best to answer them as you send them through. So I'm going to start with some pre-sent questions in. So thank you to those of you who sent those through to me. The first one is, how do you, and this is specific to the coaches, not necessarily from a coaching perspective, but how do I enjoy my off season? And Ray would have been perfect to answer this because she is currently in New Zealand getting ready for the Worlds, which are happening this weekend. So she is actually training. So I can only really answer what I do with my off season based around what I used to do when I was racing. And for me, that was take some time off after racing, usually a couple of weeks is all I needed. And then I was really kind of focusing on getting prepared for next year. So let me know, actually. You can send in a comment in the Q&A as well, what you're training for. I can answer some questions around that. But I was cycling, I was time trialing, and then later on I went into ultra endurance cycling. So unlike you triathletes who are trying to do an awful lot more, I only focused on one. So I never really had too much of an issue with that off season. What I did used to do with my off season is I would introduce some cross training, which I think is valuable, at least for me, from my perspective, and from a coaching perspective, also with my clients. When I'm in off season, I do enjoy doing some stuff. I used to do some CrossFit when CrossFit was popular. I like to do some running now. I recently took a month off with an injury, and when I came back, I started doing some running. So yeah, make sure, just a reminder, make sure you send me through some questions in the Q&A. I don't think the chat's going to work for you. I think we turned that off, but the Q&A does work. So you should be able to just pop them in the Q&A and I will answer your questions. They don't have to be about winter training or off season. They can be absolutely and completely random, as long as they're not too personal. So on to the next question, which is around the testing. Some of you may have seen we recently launched a partnership. We haven't really announced this properly, but we launched a partnership with Inside Testing. And a little bit of background on them. Inside Testing has a variety of different tests. If you look at their website, you'll see it's a 20-second all-out effort, 3-minute, 6-minute, and 12-minute. Well, I'm prepared to be wrong on that. Thankfully, with the Humango algorithm and interface with them, you only have to do a 20-second and 3-minute effort, and then later on, a different day or afterwards, you can do a 12-minute effort. And their science behind that actually gets you quite like high 90% in comparison to lab, and you can set your zones within Humango by fat max, lactate threshold 1, lactate threshold 2, VO2 max, and we get a lot more data as well. So a very hyper personalized look at setting your testing. That's what we would consider the best. This time of year is, depending on where you're at, a really good time of year to sort of calibrate that. Certainly after taking some time off, if you've taken some time off or you've been a little bit less rigid and you've done some cross training, it's really good to make sure that you do have the right intensity set within your Humango metrics. The caveat to that, I would say, a lot of people that I've spoken to, amateur self-coached athletes, do tend to come off their break or off their structured training, period of non-structured training, and do the testing right away. It really depends on what you've been doing, but I would recommend a week or two of kind of getting back to that structure, even if you are manually adjusting the intensity down to compensate and maybe training by rate of perceived exertion. You know what an effort, we should be building up an understanding of what an effort feels like. And of course, then doing the testing. Just because if you do the testing right after a break, you might not be in the best physical shape, your body might not respond as well. And certainly within a couple of weeks, that testing data might not even be that reflective, because you will see your body shaking off those cobwebs and blowing off that dust as you get back to training. So hopefully that answers. I can't remember who sent that the testing through, but yeah, other tests, obviously, there's plenty within the Humango library. You can just go to the Humango library, type in test, and see what we have, or go to metrics and click on assess performance in your metrics, and that will guide you through how to do a test. Cool. Stephen, thank you for your question. I'm just going to read this out. I have been mostly running, did my first half in over a decade and smashed a 5K PR this past Sunday. Well done. I am planning to get ramped up with swim and bike as my goals are some type of triathlon next year. What do you recommend on how to create lasting schedule changes? I am planning on adding at least one day of bike and swim and then go to 2 or so. Is this the right approach to make sure the consistent training sticks? And if so, in what case, what is the percentages of training I should mark on Humango to allocate for each sport? Yeah, great question. It's really hard to answer that without taking a deeper look at your data and gathering more data. If I understand what you're saying, yeah, starting on adding with 1 day of bike and swim is great. Yeah, I mean, see how you respond to that. See how that affects your fatigue. If you're gathering health data, which I really recommend doing, whether that is with like Apple Health or Garmin, I think Sunto gathers it now. Whoop, you can, if you connect Whoop to Apple, and of course Aura Ring. And I apologize, if you go to devices and apps and add a device, you can see which we connect to. Strongly recommend gathering your health data, and then of course filling out the subjective data after each workout in Humango, and then when you wake up in the morning. The reason I suggest that is that Hugo does a really good job of analyzing your health data and your subjective feedback, and giving you some little warning signs if you are starting to fatigue, and that can be really useful as you start to get back to it. So you wouldn't necessarily expect to see that from 1 day, but with you still continuing to run, which I believe that's what you're suggesting you're going to continue to run and add in the bike and swim, you might start to see that. And we really want to make sure your body's responding well to that. So presumably you might do a week or two of that, and then start to add into 2. Yeah, I mean, the simplest way to do that really is to just make sure that you're updating your default availability. Within the next couple of weeks, we're going to be changing that, and we'll be sending you out a nice how-to video on making sure that you understand how to do that, because we're just basically taking the 3 areas in which we have a calendar. Obviously the default availability, which is your every week; exceptional availability, which is your adjusting your schedule week by week or day by day, and then of course this is all reflected onto your actual calendar where you see your training. And that was done because of the limitations of our dev team, our resources at the time. But we appreciate that's a bit confusing and long-winded in terms of actually, why do we need 3 calendars? So in the very same way that you have a Google Calendar, an iCalendar, if you use Apple, and you can move your meetings around and stuff like that, essentially that's what you'll be able to do with your sports training. So right now, adjust your default weekly availability. In the future, it'll be adjusting it directly on that calendar. But just do that as you're ready to increase it. And as long as you put your maximum availability, you shouldn't see too much. Hugo has some hard constraints set in, so you shouldn't really be seeing a really hard or a really long bike or swim workout as your first one. but it should be maintaining that run quite nicely. And then as you go to 2 for each, you know, it's going to start spreading that out a little bit and just gently, you know, building that up. Of course, there's loads of ways you can optimize your training within Humango. So if you do find anything weird, you know, our customer service team is fantastic and really helpful in terms of reviewing any things that could be a potential bug, because you know that we do have those. So hopefully, Stephen, that answers your question. And yes, thank you for following up. Hugo helped you get a PR. Went from this is fantastic. I love this, Stephen. Thank you. I went from barely a 12-minute mile to a 8:28 on Sunday, which is mega. Well done. So thank you. How should I set realistic goals for the off season? Yeah, I think great question, and it depends. Loads of it depends on that, but I would suggest it really, the number one thing for me is to just have a little a sense check of where your mentality is, you know, throughout the season, as one of the key indicators of what you should do on off season. If you're chomping at the bit the whole way through the season, you felt really mentally motivated, engaged, wanting to do more, maybe there's just, you know, not enough time in the day to kind of get that done, then I would suggest that you're probably in a great mental place to just be like picking a focus that you're weaker on and actually targeting that. So maybe late this year or early next, we're going to have our new goal setting feature. One of the key things of that is that you'll be able to pick a performance goal. Now, that at the earliest iteration could be something like sprint or speed. It could be VO2 max, it could be threshold, or it could be endurance. And you could look at yourself objectively, or maybe it's not objectively, maybe it's subjectively, and you want to do something like, you know, set a Strava PB up a short hill, which would be, you know, great for you targeting VO2 max. Or maybe you know that that's weaker. Maybe you want to improve your speed or something like that. And you can set that within your goals. I would recommend that for somebody who's kind of highly motivated and wants to get stuck in with preparing for performance for next year. And, you know, that's a great way for those type of people. But I would, again, the caveat to that for me is I've worked with a lot of athletes who, you know, kind of go from one season straight into the next. Maybe they still take a little bit of a break, but they work really hard in the off season, focused, not specific training for their goals, but certainly with an emphasis of building a foundation or doing training for the sport they want to achieve. And then by the time they get round to their build training or their peak training, they're already mentally burnt out because they've just really overcommitted and done too much. So I would say that off season can also be a really good place for you to set a goal, which is, you know, maybe not specific for your actual event, maybe a complementary goal. So if you're doing Xterra or you are a mountain bike cyclist, you know, go to the mountain bike park. You know, work on those skills. If you do, you know, gravel, similarly, do some difficult gravel. You know, learn to handle your gravel bike. Work in the pool on your form, you know, do some strength and conditioning to work on some imbalances. It's still going to help your big picture, but it's not necessarily the same amount of work or load or stress that you're going to be placing yourself under when you start to get to the point where you really need to start focusing on those goals. And again, I think the way you determine that is you just have a really a sense check or objective, try to objectify how you felt in the previous season of racing. Because if you found that you were just like having to force yourself to train because you were near your goals and you knew you couldn't miss a session, I would suggest that not really going, you know, gung-ho or forcing yourself into that is great, and do something different. Again, it doesn't have to be completely random, but I have clients this time of year who do a lot of like cross-country skiing and stuff like that, partly because they don't want to do long rides indoors, partly because they have, you know, access to some of the best skiing in the world. But it's great cross training, and if it helps them engage and get motivated in a couple of months' time, and we really need to focus on the bike work, then all for it. So hopefully that answered the how do you set realistic goals for the off season. Oh, we've got a follow up. Fantastic. So, how do you try to objectify how you felt during the last season? What's a good way to assess how you performed and how you can find your weaknesses? I think that's a great question. So, um, yeah, I mean, hopefully you've been. I mean, if you're using Humango for that season, then you're going to have your data available for you to look at. Um, Data is going to be a great key for that, and this is where some people might start to realize just how important leaving yourself, if you're not working with a coach, leaving yourself notes within the workouts that you've completed or within the activities to start to contextualize what that meant. For example, excuse me, you've done a race and there was bits. A triathlon's a great example because you really know, and you'll have that race data around, were you first out of the water, and then were you like mid pack by the time you started the run. If you're doing something cycling, and let's just take a time trial for example, were you able to hold the time trial position for as long as you want, or did you get people commenting, or did you have to move away from it? All of these little things, they're not necessarily something which you might have the time or energy or emphasis to be able to work on. Maybe you did in the season a little bit, but these things can all be great things that you take away and then build an off-season goal around. For example, and time trial can be great because even if you're not using a time trial or a triathlon bike in the bike when you're racing a triathlon, if you want to be aerodynamic, you need to hold that position. So a lot of that can be you're in the wrong position for a start. So getting a bike fit in the off season, working on your position and optimizing that is great because you're not going to be disrupting your training when it's really important during the actual season. You're trying to hit like power goals or anything like that. So getting a bike fit, or even just actually visiting a personal trainer, or working on your core and identifying muscular imbalances or weaknesses can be a really, really positive way to first identify that and set that expectation or set that goal, but how you would actually then move forward with that, especially when you're trying to employ that within Humango, because as much as we want Hugo to be able to count the amount of times you broke the aerodynamic position during your triathlon or your time trial, Hugo's not quite there in terms of being able to do that. But the gains which you can make in terms of optimizing your position and becoming comfortable during the off season can actually translate to greater personal bests and even more in there. Next question: how can I prioritize recovery during the off season without losing fitness? That's a great question. Because that definitely ties into what I was saying around not going necessarily going gung ho from in your off season, and digging yourself a hole in which when you get to the season that you need to start focusing a lot more on recovery, because we're looking for the most amount of training stress, training load, however you want to quantify that, over a great period of time. We don't necessarily want to look at it in isolation, although there are circumstances where your availability might force you to do more one week because you've got an easy week, or you've got less time for training later, especially this time of year around the holidays. But ultimately, we want to look at the most amount of training over a long period of time, which Hugo is really good at and is designed to do, right? In terms of our ramp rate, is what we're talking about there. But of course, you can adjust that. You can, of course, do more than what Hugo says. And how do we know how to when we're tired? I mean, first off, definitely Apple, Oura Ring, Whoop, any of those health measurements are great. I love those measurements coming in. I always tell all my clients to judge how prepared or ready their body is for training based on changes to how they feel when they wake up. And a lot of this you'll hear is when somebody says, oh, if you wake up feeling tired, grumpy, low mood, or anything like that, you shouldn't train, or you should maybe reduce the intensity or whatever. And there's some truth to that. But what I will say is, if you're just somebody that wakes up like that, then actually, you might just be prepared. Some people just do. They don't want to get out of bed. That's absolutely fine. But if you notice that sometimes you really dread it, if you normally just don't want to get out of bed and you feel a bit tired or groggy, maybe there's a chronic illness, maybe there's sleep issues that that are chronic again, and that's just how you wake up. But if you really are struggling, or you notice extra low mood or extra grumpiness throughout the day, that's a warning sign that you need to focus on your recovery. And I would look at it more or less at losing fitness at this time of year, and more about actually, again, the greatest amount of training over a big period of time on that. And it's a great time of year to be trying different recovery routines. Yoga, it's great. Get yourself to a yoga class if you do that. Foam stretching, foam rolling, obviously great. I love my percussion massage gun. I have like a Gen 1 Tim Tam, so it sounds like I'm chainsawing away, but the Theragun and stuff like that makes some much more silent ones. Despite the lack of science, I also love my Aerolax air compression pants as well. I feel like they feel great on me, or getting a massage. Again, sleep is great, and working on your nutrition, another good opportunity at this time of year. Working on nutrition, trying out different things. Again, it might be a bit early, or it is a bit early for most people to be developing that on the bike, or getting gut adaptation in terms of getting that prepared. If we know or we thought that 60 grams of carbohydrates was the maximum for a long time, that went to 90, and we know that actually with gut adaptation you can get that more like 120, which is a heck of a lot. The danger that people sometimes, or the mistake people make, is that they don't start to prepare their gut before their event, and you need potentially 12 weeks to do that. So unless you've got a goal within 12 weeks of now, it's no need to really be adapting your gut. But what you can do is start to try out different types of food, so that what's going to be palpable, or be sit in your gut without any GI distress by the time you start to get to that gut adaptation period. So yeah, lots of opportunities in the off season to develop your nutrition, as well as develop a new recovery routine, for example. So hopefully that answered your question, and thank you for sending it. Again, feel free to keep those questions coming in the Q&A. We do have a cheeky little question here, which is, can you tell us a little bit more about the upcoming features or in the roadmap for Humango? And absolutely, yes, I can. But I have to be very careful, because I am often the person who overshares and gets in trouble for releasing somewhat privileged or confidential information coming up. So our big update, which we finished, sort of finished testing earlier this week, is how I mentioned the new way availability works. Looks a lot more like Google Calendar, iCal, in terms of how that works. There's some really cool mini updates to how you can share to social media and add pictures and stuff, photos, in terms of activities coming very soon. We do have, and we've been saying this for months, it's really not on us, but a Zwift integration is basically being tested by Zwift right now. We've done everything on our end. And we presume we'll be in the next batch of devices or apps that they release. They seem to be releasing them in batches, and we'll have that. Of course, you can still do the manual way, but we would love to be able to push seamlessly workouts to Zwift. So hopefully, maybe that will be a nice holiday gift for you all from us. New goal setting, as I said, one of the biggest questions we've had is that their goal doesn't conform, I'll say conform, to the standard distances, whether you're doing a triathlon or any of the cycling or even run distances that we have there. So we really hope this year, but it might be early next, to have our new goal setting wizard, we're calling it, where you can, go through exactly what it is that you want to train for, really customize each individual. If you're doing a triathlon, each part of that, change the distance, the elevation, and really kind of hyper personalize those. A lot of it is, just the way we gather that data. Hugo does a great job of helping you train, and for most people, actually, it's more about availability and responsiveness to training than it is anything else. But we appreciate that. Yeah, often we get a lot of questions from people who are looking to do something a little bit off plan. So hopefully that answers that question. We obviously have lots of plans for next year in terms of our features. I don't want to go into it. One of them, actually, I'm just going to touch on, Stephen, answers your question. We might look at connecting with a platform like Tonal. What we really want to do is build something a lot more user friendly within our own strength and conditioning. So whether you're aware or not, we are part of the Human Powered Health family of companies, and they have performance labs which are popping up and opening around the country, and possibly abroad as well, maybe in the future. And one of the fantastic things that they bring is a wealth of experience and knowledge from their physiologists, and certainly one of the things that we want to do is improve the way we prescribe strength and conditioning. And by that, I mean for the user to be able to input, for you guys to be able to put in what equipment you have, or do you have a specific body muscular group or area that you need to work on? Maybe it's injury prevention, maybe it's an imbalance, maybe coming back from injury, maybe you have a home gym, maybe you have a full gym access, or maybe you have nothing at all. And we realized that while our strength and conditioning component is one of the best on the markets based on what we can do in terms of prescribing that, actually we know we could be doing it a lot better. So probably I would say mid next year, maybe between after Q1, maybe early Q2, we should have something ready for you all, which completely changes the game, I would say, in terms of you being able to come back from twisting your ankle or something like that, and know that you've had, maybe that's a bit of an understatement, but maybe you broke your leg and you've had a long period of having to rehab, and now that you've got to work on that, and you've gone past the physical therapy point, but you still have that desire to be able to address that imbalance, and that's something we aspire to be able to do for you all. So I'm hoping that the boss and everybody that watches this afterwards isn't gonna send me a little message saying that's an overshare. But thank you very much for that question. So the next question is, at what point are users able to customize something so much that it's no longer actually the AI, and you lose a lot of the potential there? And that's a really, really good point, and we do hear that a lot. So thank you. And of course, if you're not aware about what we're talking about here, if you go to your seasons tab and you go to phases or periodization, you can actually go down and click edit and change stuff like sport distribution. You can change the energy by zone and stuff like that. You can change, of course, the duration of the workouts, and you can change it so much that actually you're not getting you're changing the AI's methodology so much that it might not be best for you. And we've seen that because we've seen people that have tried to input a really, really high amount of zone 7, for example, and it's not safe, and we'd stop that from happening. But as an extreme example, you can be led that. And I think that there is there's always a coaching, well, what if question to that. There's it's worth playing around with it, but sometimes, the power is within the AI. But you, and I think that there's small amounts of changes which you can do. And honestly, at the point at which, if you feel like you do need that customization, actually having a human coach working in tandem with Humango is something which we promote a lot of, and there's things that AI can't do. Like I mentioned earlier, can't count the amount of times you break arrow position and prescribe workouts based on that. So we are building out, and we have more and more coaches joining us on a weekly basis. Part of Ray and I's job actually is to manage and onboard and help the new coaches coming onto there. So if you do feel like you are adjusting the parameters of what Hugo can do so much that that actually you're starting to self-coach more than you are allow Hugo to coach, then maybe it's an opportunity to reach out to somebody, and you can do so by clicking on, depending on where you are, your little avatar or the menu, and then going to coaching and having a look for a coach. The beauty of being on a platform like Humango is it's all remote, but maybe you do want to find something in your local area, someone in your local area. So thank you. Looking like we have time maybe for one more. Feel free to send them in. I've got this. I've got one about groups. I can just see Stephen sent something through. Is there ever a plan, or did you miss it, or did I miss it, to have Hugo create a training plan to obtain certain speed distance combos, and what the achievable data is setting a race date? Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So for example, I want to run a sub 22 5K or sub 2 hour half marathon. How long would it take based on your past year? Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things we'll do with our new goal setting is actually allow you to customize how you want to perform, in terms of, some people just want to run a 5K and, not be terrible, and other people want to win, or maybe you have a time goal and stuff like that. And that's something we want to put in. In terms of using data to be able to do that, there are obvious limitations to that, in terms of, a past year plus of data probably is enough. We're not really in a position to analyze multiple years. 1 year on its own probably isn't enough, even from a coaching perspective, to answer a question like that, because we only have a brief, I know a year is a long time, but a brief snapshot around what your responsiveness is to training. We do have aspirations to be able to take your data and build your ramp rate based upon that data. That is a massive task. No one's doing that. And there's apart from coaches, human coaches, there's a very good reason for that, because you have to contextualize all that data. So for example, it's very rare that we ever hit a consistent, 2 to 3 ramp rate across all of the year on average, or factoring in recovery weeks, because of stuff like availability issues, because of sickness, because of races, because of injuries, all these things. Now, if we ask Hugo to analyze that data and build you a ramp rate or a targeted plan for a sub 22 minute 5K in your example, Stephen, and this is a great question, please don't see me as knocking you back here, because I would love to see this as a feature. Hugo is going to build that around what you tell, what the data says. So at the first call, we would need you to have contextualized every single data point in there, which we know from our experience with trying to gather data. And I can ask you all to paste, how have all of you done your subjective feedback perfectly over the last year? And this is not what we're talking about, but if you haven't, then the chances of you contextualizing your data over the long period are very slim. That's the problem that we have, because if you have had a period of time off training that is not reflective, then that ramp rate is going to be skewed and biased. Now, the reason a coach can do that is because a coach is going to ask you that questions. And if you're engaging with a coach, you're paying enough and you're probably committing enough to be able to take that time. What you want and what drives people to come to us is the simplicity of getting that. And what we're talking about here is wildly complex, not just from a programming and development point of view, but from a user input point of view. And you could get something which is completely unreflective based around that. So as a coach, yes, it's one of the first things I said when I joined Humango over 3 years ago now. Is it possible to take enough data and to say, here is what you're objectively able to achieve in terms of ramp rate, in terms of results. But unfortunately, based around the amount of additional contextualization we would need from the users and the fact that we need to fix some of the other things, it's not something we're committing to in this next release, maybe next year or hopefully next year. Again, looking at the Q2 roadmap, we might be able to sneak that in. But honestly, that's probably one of the ways that I would love to see us move forward, at least, and especially from my own personal, very biased opinion as a coach. Any further questions or anything like that, please do reach out via the Contact Us button in the Humango app. Have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next webinar.